Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my GW18 Team Selection. This will be my last video recording from Japan, so a little bit of a nice little nugget here added in my team value in the bank. But ultimately, we will be sort of looking towards a blank game week here between Man City and Brentford. That game will not be played, and Liverpool versus Arsenal, of course, is that key fixture here that makes this game week and planning for this game week a little bit tough because a lot of us probably still own Liverpool players or Arsenal players, and ultimately their value this week is a little bit diminished. And in terms of, let's say, major news outside of players who are actually playing this game week, Erling Haaland has not been seen in training at all for the sort of Saudi Arabia trading camp. And it seems like he will not play at all in the Club World Cup. And the same situation or same condition seems to have been applied to Jeremy Doku, Kevin De Bruyne, and that will probably mean we might not actually see Haaland as soon as Game Week 19. I think a lot of us were actually expecting for him to come right back in Game Week 19. It actually seems like maybe his injury is a little bit worse than imagined, and maybe actually the question I suppose is whether he even plays versus Game Week 20, Sheffield United at home, which is such a key fixture. On the contrary, it seems like Kevin De Bruyne has actually been in training sessions, but clearly, of course, he's not going to be rushed back this time round. And so I think when you're, let's say, holding on to players like Foden and Alvarez, you shouldn't be too worried right now. It's ultimately a case of whether their minutes will actually diminish more around 2024 and beyond, and that would be Game Week 21 and beyond. As far as, let's say, other impacts for this week in terms of your transfer for Game Week 18, I think the most important thing to talk about is what Ben Crellin has, for example, in store for us in terms of what he's discussed about the EFL Cup impacts. So right now, the situation is such that in Game Week 26, we have a couple of fixtures that are in danger of being blank game weeks. And I think this Ben Crellin tweet is the best example of that. Do give Ben Crellin a follow on X if you haven't already. He's the absolute best when it comes to, for example, planning out fixtures. And actually, around this time of year, we do absolutely have to be listening to what Ben says, because that will also ultimately impact, how many double game week players you actually have on time, and whether you need to, for example, prevent certain hits for players who will ultimately blank, etc., etc. So right now we have four fixtures that are, of course, in danger of becoming blanks. Chelsea versus Spurs in Game Week 26, Man United versus Fulham, Liverpool versus Luton, and West Ham versus Brentford. The key thing between the last two fixtures here, let's say Liverpool and West Ham, is depending on who actually wins in that game between West Ham and Liverpool, one of them will be completely removed, right? Let's say if West Ham actually lose to Liverpool, assuming that the overdog wins in this situation here, then of course that West Ham blank will not happen. The West Ham game will continue to happen, which is going to be West Ham versus Brentford. However, of course, depending on, let's say, certain semi-final lineups, which include Chelsea, Fulham, Borough, and one of Liverpool and West Ham, we will, of course, find out that there might be effectively three blanks potentially. And so that situation is going to be tough, but we can also manage that knowing that ultimately Game Week 26 is still 9 game weeks away, really, and we don't really need to worry about it too much. One thing, of course, is that Liverpool's fixture between Liverpool and Luton could actually move towards an earlier double game week, which would be something like Game Week 24 or 25 at the earliest, if Liverpool actually beat Arsenal in their sort of FA Cup run. And so that's something to tune into. Unfortunately, of course, Arsenal only play Liverpool, deep into the future, I suppose, December 24, and that's, of course, post-deadline. So right now, we don't actually have enough information to actually determine whether we actually have the correct landscape of blanks and, for example, double game weeks in the future. But you need to get as much information as possible, and I think recommending that you make your transfer after the Liverpool versus West Ham game and the the semi-final draw is done is the most essential thing that I would recommend you do. As far as, let's say, for this week, for my team, obviously, if you've been following my transfer plans video, my team actually ended up with a pretty mediocre 61 points. I did take a -4 to bring in Julian Alvarez, and it was pretty stupid because obviously I've got two players on the bench in terms of Gordon and Gabriel who ended up getting 6 points. And that's life, I'm not too deeply regretful of it. I think my rank, worst case scenario, would be still within the top 20k, probably on the sort of bottom half of the 20k in terms of, let's say, 19,000, something like that. If, let's say, Solanke gets his triple bonus points. At the time of this recording, I still don't know the exact outcome of Bournemouth versus Luton points in terms of FPL and how they're correctly going to be assessed. So I'm just going to assume that I have a red arrow. As far as, let's say, moving on, though, a couple issues with my team, I would say, that are fresh, which is obviously going to be Colwill getting hooked at 45 minutes versus Newcastle, and then Gordon, of course, suffering a knock/injury due to a Caicedo tackle in the same game. right now, I think we've seen plenty of Anthony Gordon knocks, which have actually resulted in him playing the next fixture immediately. Given that it is a knock, I don't really know how, let's say, Newcastle staff would assess that. But I think that obviously gives me pause in terms of whether I want to focus my transfers in a certain direction, right? Now it seems like Gordon could be a priority transfer out. And the only reason why I say this is because if I look at Gordon in my team, if he, let's say, misses Luton away, now he could obviously play Nottingham Forest at home, but then the next three fixtures after that are pretty horrible. Liverpool away, Man City at home, and then Aston Villa away. I could very easily bring Gordon back into my team instead on Game Week 23 when he faces Luton again, but next time at home. And so that could be the best scenario for my team. I have a chance here to move into Richarlison, are my immediate thoughts in terms of transfer plans. The other transfer plan, of course, would be focused around either Darwin or Cash. I think these are the two other major issues within my team. It's very unlikely, in my opinion, that Cash will actually play this Aston Villa game here versus Sheffield United at home, unless there's an exceptional circumstance, like let's say Unai Emery confirms that Pau is definitely going to be out of this fixture, and therefore that leaves a chance for maybe Matty Cash to play right back. They obviously have Langley in the squad as well, and so that could also mean that they could simply just play Konsa right back once again, move Langley into, for example, center back position, and that would obviously have a huge impact on my team. Alternatively, of course, I can just focus my efforts around Darwin. That would be, of course, a transfer towards Solanke, but I don't really think it's worthwhile here, even though Solanke actually has a pretty good fixture. I'll just have to see what happens as well, depending on, let's say, whether Darwin actually starts in the EFL Cup game. I think the reality right now is that most of the Liverpool forwards have been pretty poor, and this actually includes both Luis Diaz and Salah, and even Gakpo, for example, who usually comes off the bench for Darwin. Those players being poor mean that, let's say, Darwin's actual poor form itself shouldn't actually take away his minutes too much, because ultimately everyone has been subpar. It's not the case that he's been the only one who's been stinking it up, if we're being honest. So I think I'm not that down on Darwin in the context that I want to have 11 playing players for this week, and I don't really want to, for example, transfer out someone who's definitely going to start. Whereas in the case of Cash, of course, I think it's quite an issue, I suppose, that it really doesn't make sense to have Cash in the ideal starting 11 for this Aston Villa team. So for that reason alone, I do think that Cash is a good transfer out. And the three transfer options that I have in my mind are obviously based on whether Unai Emery can give us sufficient news, and also depending on, let's say, maybe even the impacts potentially of blank game weeks and the Carabao Cup draw. So looking at the potential transfer options, I've got Trippier, I've got Pau, and I've got Konsa. So Pau and Konsa, this will either be, let's say, going for Pau just because I think he's probably still a little bit more nailed than Konsa most times. And of course, if let's say Pau actually has a knock, then I'll just simply go towards Konsa. The reason why I'm actually not tempted between, let's say, Moreno or Dean is because I still think Dean has played well enough this season where I would struggle to believe that he would suddenly lose out on all the sort of major minutes within this Aston Villa team, even though, of course, Moreno has scored 2 goals already since coming back. And so for me, I think we need to take away the goal out of the context. Dean, of course, has been quite crucial in terms of build-up and things in general. He, of course, is not a goal scorer when it comes to, let's say, style of play. He's more of a crosser of the ball than anything. Like, let's say Moreno is almost that sort of traditional wing hybrid of a fullback. So I do think the interesting situation here is that ultimately Aston Villa probably brings the best value this week when it comes to a clean sheet. And so let's say taking a transfer for a centre-back, even though it's quite a boring transfer, it can actually provide you with a lot of value, because how often do you have, almost effectively a guaranteed clean sheet versus a team? And really, Sheffield United at home presents that opportunity for many, many teams. Arsenal, for example, were able to get that clean sheet. Chelsea recently got that clean sheet too. So that's my immediate thoughts in terms of Sheffield United at home, and also a transfer out. With Trippier, of course, it depends on, let's say, whether a blank actually falls for Newcastle. And secondly, of course, Trippier has been playing poor recently, but I don't really think that should take away his minutes from the team. I don't think Eddie Howe is some sort of reactionary manager. Of course, he's got to react to the fact that Trippier has been playing poorly, but I don't think he's going to suddenly take Trippier out of the first team for whatever reason. I do think that the rest, for example, versus Chelsea was planned until, of course, Kraft himself actually got injured. So looking at the scenario here, as I said, I think I have 2 prospective transfers. Either Gordon to Richarlison is one, and then another move, of course, where I just simply got out of cash into, let's say, Trippier, Pau, or Konsa. And I think they're all 3 equally good options. The key thing here with Trippier, of course, is that it is Newcastle away from home. So I think even though we're looking at the fixture as in a green fixture like Luton, ultimately home and away is a significant difference. We could see that as well from the lens of either Luton as an attacking team or Newcastle and their general performance and how drastically different it is home and away. So with that as context, I do think Trippier is not as powerful a move as it might seem this week. I was also previously eyeing up a move for Tsimikas to Trent Alexander-Arnold, but my expectation is that he probably will be, let's say, rested for the Carabao Cup game, or at least rested such that I still think that he will actually play on Game Week 18 versus Arsenal here, playing at home. So I still think Tsimikas is worth keeping, and ultimately, of course, moving into Trent isn't the most amount of upside since ultimately he's facing Arsenal anyways. So those are my immediate thoughts in terms of my team and transfer plans that I have available. As I said, the Darwin move is probably something that I find rather unlikely. I'd probably actually just play a 4-5-1 in the worst case scenario here and then actually bench Darwin if I absolutely have to. I don't actually really mind, for example, taking a hit out of someone like Cash so that I can go into a 4-5-1 here if I really, really think that Darwin for sure is not going to start versus Arsenal in this game. So that's going to be my immediate thoughts in terms of my team selection. So let's actually jump into the actual layout of the team itself. As far as who am I going to play, obviously it's going to be Dubravka, Luton away. Yes, of course, maybe Areola will actually come back to Man United at home, but I still think West Ham have been pretty poor of a team. Yes, of course, they got a clean sheet last week, but that's really not indicative of their overall performance this season, particularly from the defensive point of view. United, I still fancy them scoring away from home, so yeah, it's going to be an easy Dubravka play here. In terms of the three attacking defenders that I'll be playing this week, I will be playing with Pedro Porro, playing with Colwill, persisting with Colwill anyway, just because the fixture for Gabriel is that poor, and then playing Tsimikas with the expectation that actually he will be able to start for this fixture. And the assumption, of course, is that Tsimikas in general has played well, has featured in the big games this season, so not too concerned about his general availability for this Arsenal fixture. It just depends on of course, whether the EFL Cup game makes me sort of change my mind in terms of the minutes that, let's say, Tsimikas and both Joe Gomez could be playing, and of course, knock-on impacts such as Darwin. As far as the midfield, I'll be playing with Saka. Gordon will be transferred out for Richarlison. That's the sort of top move I have in my mind, because I do like to make attacking transfers instead of defending transfers this week. Even though, of course, a move like Konsa is so good, it's still sort of in the back of my mind as a -4, but it's not something that I'm heavily considering right now with the expectation that Darwin really starts for Arsenal. So I will be playing with Richarlison here. I like the opportunity to take Richarlison at a home fixture here. Yes, of course, Everton have been keeping clean sheets left, right, and center, but the Spurs attack is still very, very good. We've seen them score multitudes of goals versus top teams, particularly top defenses like Arsenal, like City as well. So no surprises that I think Richarlison actually presents himself as a high upside option once again in a week where Gordon seems to be at risk of actually starting. So the rest of the team will be Palmer, Son, and Salah. In terms of the forward line here, I will be fielding Darwin and Watkins. Once again, the expectation is that I think Darwin will start. And of course, because if I have a larger issue in my team, such as a Anthony Gordon injury that will not be, for example, fully disclosed and fully sort of treated and assessed before the deadline, then, I am sort of at the whims of basically guessing whether or not Anthony Gordon will be able to start. And my assumption probably is that he won't start. So Matt Ritchie will probably play. He was available for the EFL Cup game. I imagine if, let's say, Gordon is suffering from a knock, then maybe Kraft will actually have to play this fixture out. So that's my assumption here. I also assume that Darwin will start. If I don't think Darwin will start based on the EFL Cup game, as I said, I will probably take that hit for Konsa to come in for Cash, because I do think Cash is quite a spoiled asset. It also depends on whether I think that Unai Emery will, for example, disclose whether Pau actually has an injury that will sort of preclude him from playing Game Week 18 as well. If that's the case, then I actually will probably just play Cash and just keep Gabriel at the back of my bench. In terms of my bench for this week, though, it will be Areola, it will be Alvarez, it will be Gabriel and Cash at the firm back of my bench until, of course, we get some sort of Pau news that makes me change my mind. So that's going to be the team as it stands. As far as, let's say, captaincy for this week, I think it's very clearly on Watkins, and then the vice captaincy will be on Son. Ultimately, Everton have been fantastic this season. Yes, of course, midfielders in general are better than forwards, but with Watkins here, with basically the best fixture in the Premier League available, I talked about a little bit of regret in terms of, let's say, not playing the Palmer captaincy or even thinking about it, actually, when it comes to how poor Sheffield United are as a team and sort of not targeting them enough. Ultimately, this is a good chance to do so here with Watkins, with the captaincy here, even though he's not a penalty taker. So I will be going with Watkins. His underlying stats this season have been astoundingly good. Aston Villa, of course, clearly have tremendously improved from an attacking point of view, also on a defending point of view too. But of course, you're just going to target an attacker here with such a good fixture. And that's going to be it in terms of my team selection, Game Week 18. Of course, I will be sort of staying tuned into EFL Cup news and potential, for example, -4s that I have to take depending on what happens with the Liverpool-West Ham game in the EFL Cup. But that's going to be it for Game Week 18. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.